All right. You know, I wanted to cover this issue on Syria, and I'm gonna. But this thing has got me so frustrated. Because you know what? This is the same kind of crap they do all over the place. They're too lazy and too incompetent and too inept to do their own real work. So they go out and they find people that they can coerce and abuse and then threaten them with all manner of horrors unless they help. And then they get them to go out and do their dirty work for them. In this other location, aside from ensnaring mentally disabled people in their stings, the ATF storefronts in several cities stimulated the market for stolen goods, boosting the appeal of theft and burglary. In Phoenix, they charged this guy with selling 11 weapons to agents at an undercover storefront. He obtained most of the firearms during residential burglaries he committed in late 2010. They got another guy, Roderick Jones, committed 7 burglaries in 6 weeks. He stole generators, air compressors, leaf blowers, oxygen tanks, pressure washers, reaping more than $2,000 in sales from anything for a buck. That was the name of their store. Warren Phillips did the same thing, breaking into cars and homes, stealing GPS devices, satellite radios, and even a U.S. Navy-owned computer. He raced immediately over to the undercover pawn shop to make quick cash, as much as $500 at a time. This guy actually even stole a DVD player from their store and then sold it back to them. This guy, here's another guy. He stole a bike outside of a Walgreens, and he rode it straight over to the store to make $25. One of the larger thefts linked to the operation was a theft of wedding and engagement rings worth $15,000 that were stolen 4 months after the store opened. Quote, this is a guy who's a professor from Pittsburgh. It requires no great thinking to know if you accept stolen goods in a pawn shop, people are going to sell you stolen goods. You're asking people who frequent that place to rob and burglarize their neighbors. They later on, after this whole thing blew up, they offered for people to come in at the sheriff's office and find their stuff. Only 23 items were recovered by owners. That didn't include the guns. I'll tell you what, some of the guns were even stolen from police squad cars. Listen to this. This is so outrageous. ATF agents said in court documents that tried to deter such thefts by paying less for police guns. You've got to be kidding me. So you know, as an ATF agent, that people are breaking into police squad cars and stealing the guns. And your major attempt to deter that is to offer to pay less? The burglaries associated with ATL Blaze caused other problems for local law enforcement as well. Sheriff deputies and local police, unaware that the weapons had already been recovered by federal agents, scrambled around to solve the burglaries, spending untold resources and taxpayer money and time from the police officers interviewing witnesses. And the weapons never made their way back to the owners. There was a pistol that was stolen from one guy's car in 2010, and it was still listed as stolen by the local police department, even when this article was posted. Now, if the ATF recovers a stolen gun, they're supposed to go in and put it into a database that's available to police to say, this serial number, 12345, is stolen. If the ATF recovered the weapon, it should be in our system, says Lieutenant Johnson of the department. We have not received any notification that it was ever recovered. Armed felons were allowed to leave the stores with a violent history now. Not this is not some guy that they got, carrying around an ounce of dope in his pocket and when he was 18 and now he's 40. These are armed felons with a violent history. And it wasn't the only time. In Albuquerque, agents said they didn't know one man was a felon when they let him leave with a revolver. It took them 2 weeks to figure it out. So they're selling guns, obviously, without running background checks, which is, again, illegal. Bandit trading let felons leave the store with guns at least 3 separate times. In a case of Condre Johnson, prosecutors noted that he sold 16 guns to agents. The news release didn't mention that the agents turned him away for one of his guns because it wasn't sawed off, because that leads to a bigger charge. The agents told Johnson they wanted a shorty, meaning a sawed-off shotgun, because having such a gun is more deadly at close range and easier to conceal. It's illegal and can mean additional prison time. Johnson left with the gun to go saw it off, but then called the agents to ask what kind of a saw to use. The agent told him how to do it. Johnny Griffin brought in 2 AK-47s, but the agents only had enough money to buy one. He was allowed to leave with the other, and he was a known felon. Agents never got it back. I'll tell you what. They opened this one of these up in a strip mall right across the street from a middle school. This allowed them to claim, wait until you hear this one. This one was opened right across the street from a middle school in Portland. And this way, when they arrested everybody, because the ATF agent said the location was near a school, it would allow them to utilize enhanced penalties for selling in a, quote, safe zone. You got to be kidding me. Later on, they tried to say that they didn't know it was across the street from a school. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the kind of abuse that is so rampant in our system. And if you think, by the way, that this is a one-off thing, well, first of all, this report only talks about 6 of these that occurred. But I can tell you that there are hundreds of these going on around the country in various formats. They may not all be pawn shops and scrap stores and what have you, but it's all the same. This one store, they got these 2 kids. Both of them were 19, and they were regulars. Both of them had very, very low IQs. And then they gave them the idea of a tattoo. The guys told them if they would be persuaded, or they should be persuaded by the guy at Squids, because he thought he was their friends, and they said, "Now you guys are honorary members of the club." After they got the tattoos, they said agents took pictures and posted them on the phony storefront's Facebook page and their website. Then they charged him with selling drugs within 1,000 feet of a school that they opened up right across the street from the school. You got to recognize. And by the way, all they got him for was selling an ounce of weed. 1 ounce. So tell me that this was worth it. Tell me that this was worth, and by the way, since when is an ounce of weed a federal crime? You see, that's my point when I was talking about this yesterday, when I said to you that the federal prisons are just chock full of people who have not committed federal crimes. Most of them are low-level drug deals. And I got to tell you, you see, all they need is to use the Commerce Clause. All they need to use is the Commerce Clause to say drugs crossed a border. And so they'll set up stings where they make the guy come across the border from one state to another. Like, he'll go from East St. Louis to West St. Louis, East St. Louis in Illinois to Western St. Louis in Missouri, and boom, now they got him on a felony beef. And then they give him federal time for a handful of crack that, wouldn't keep a mouse up all night. And then the worst part is they were charging people in the federal system, just so you understand the criminality of this. The way they were charging people in the federal system was they were saying crack was concentrated cocaine. So it was 100 times the weight. So if you got caught with an ounce of crack, it was like getting caught with 100 ounces of powdered cocaine. And then they were sentencing you based on the 100 ounces you had, which really wasn't 100 ounces. It was only 1. So street-level guys who got caught with, 3 little crack vials that were worth $50, $30, they were getting 20-year sentences. You know how they judge, and I got to tell you, this is so criminal. You know how they utilize in the federal system, you know what they call, or how they gauge the marijuana? not on when they catch you with live plants. They don't charge you with the weight of those plants. They charge you with the weight of what those plants would be if they were fully matured. So you get caught with a flower pot in your backyard where you're growing 3 pot plants. The next thing you know, you turn around and they're charging you with 2.5 pounds of marijuana. Why? Because when those plants fully matured, they delivered 2.5 pounds of marijuana. What kind of a farce is that? I know for a fact, I'm telling you, because I did their legal work. I got to tell you, and for the record, for those of you who don't know, the way the federal criminal system works is you don't have to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That's only in state court. In federal court, you only have to be found guilty by a, quote, preponderance of the evidence. That's the same level of evidentiary requirement that falls under civil cases. That's why you hear about a guy who gets off on a murder charge like O.J. Simpson, but then he loses the civil case when the family sues him for wrongful death. Because in the criminal case, they had to find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt because it was a state case. But in a civil case, they only got to find him guilty by a preponderance of the evidence. In other words, there's enough evidence here for us to believe that he really probably did it. What kind of a constitutional court system is that? And by the way, 95% of all cases do not go before a jury in the federal system. This is a U.S. district judge and a former federal prosecutor. Here's what he had to say about this whole mess. I guess I don't make the connection. They're concerned that if, among other things, they don't smoke marijuana with this guy, that they'll be given up as law enforcement. So they think a way to derail that is to suggest that he get a tattoo? They got these people to smoke marijuana in front of them. They plied kids with alcohol that the ATF agents, gave them. I tell you what. This is so criminal. Okay, I'm going to wrap this segment and go on to the Syrian thing. Man, I'm so frustrated. My blood pressure is through the roof. Yes, and here's the reason why, folks. You don't realize, just like you didn't know that the NSA 6 months ago, before Edward Snowden burst on the scene, you didn't know that the NSA was sitting there and scarfing up all your data. You suspected it maybe. You kind of thought in the back of your head, well, they probably listened to some people. You had no idea of the extent of it. And what I'm trying to tell you is you have no idea of the extent of the criminality of the state-sponsored, federally sponsored system of terrorism that is being perpetrated on America every single day. You have no clue. You think just because people are in jail, they deserve it. And I'm telling you right now, this system, every prosecutor out there is so corrupt. They don't care whether they got the right guy. They only care whether or not there's a check mark next to that particular section on their report card. How many people did I get convicted? You heard about Ryan Ferguson just getting released in Missouri. I helped an attorney do some legal briefs on a case of a young guy by the name of Joseph Dayringer, who's right now before the Missouri Supreme Court. And they've had this for 8 months now, and they haven't ruled on it yet. This kid was 15. And the prosecutor went to the one witness in the case that could prove that this kid was innocent and threatened him that he would spill the news in prison that he was a rat if he went and testified on this kid's behalf against the real criminal. The prosecutor knew it, and the judge knew it. And they let this kid go to prison. The judge is now dead, and the prosecutor back then, 27 years later, is now a judge. I'm telling you, this system is so corrupt and so evil that there is no way that Americans can allow this to continue to stand. This stuff makes those people in power in Washington look like nincompoops because it is a circle of corruption and evil that is so pervasive because they're not just trying to, hit some national agenda. This is for personal gain. And it's criminal. All right, I got 10 minutes to hit this Seymour Hersh thing. Pulitzer Prize-winning author and journalist Seymour Hersh. Guy's recently written an article out there. He's saying that President Obama was clearly not honest with the American people again, that he knew that the Sarin Gas was not by Assad's regime, that it was in fact by the rebels. Man, I'm telling you. Hersh, by the way, if you don't know who Hersh is, you got to read some of his stuff. There's links in the website, there's links on our Facebook page, and there's links in the subject section of this video. Here's what Hersh comes out and alleges. The administration buried intelligence on the fundamentalist rebel group called al-Nusra. They knew it, that al-Nusra was responsible, and they held it back. They didn't want that out because they wanted to go to war. And frankly, the only reason we didn't go to war is because Americans rose up as a massive collective group, which ought to tell you and prove to you that massive disobedience works. The administration was learning about the attacks at roughly the same speed as the civilians were. Hersh says through the daily intelligence briefings in the days that surrounded the gas attack, they didn't make a single mention of Syria. The truth is, this administration is so incompetent, they were finding out about it as on CNN and Fox News like you were. The media did nothing to investigate it. Here's this one's criminal. The media succumbed to confirmation bias in response to a UN report on the attack. The report from the UN said that the spent weapon, in other words, the shell, indicatively matches the specifics of a 330 millimeter caliber artillery rocket. Well, MIT professor Theodore Postel and other munitions experts later reviewed the photos and said that's not true. This was an improvised device made locally. It didn't match anything in the Syrian arsenal, and it would not have been able to travel the 9 kilometers that it was fired from if it had actually come from the Syrian army base. But they shelved that. Nobody wanted to talk about that. They published an analysis 2 weeks after the August 21st announcement in which they correctly assessed that the rockets involved carried a far greater payload of the sarin gas than was officially and originally estimated. The Times reported on that analysis, describing Postel and Lloyd as leading weapons experts. But so far, nobody else picked it up. You see, the media has completely and utterly given way. They're no longer media and investigative journalists. All they really now are is they sit there and wait for their email bell to go ding, or they wait for their fax machine to go to buzz, and then they pull an article out that is right off the website, the White House's printers, and then they literally go and call up some official in administration and get a quote from some sycophant in Congress, and then they come out and they report the quote to you, and it's anonymous, unnamed official. I mean, look, that's not investigative journalism. Woodward and Bernstein was investigative journalism. Seymour Hersh is investigative journalism. Cheryl Atkinson, that's investigative journalism. And those people are being beaten over the head by this administration, who are sitting there working to make sure that you don't hear the truth of what's going on around in our nation. Meanwhile, you got people out there like Schumer and Feinstein who are trying to pass limitations on what qualifies as a journalist. If you don't work for a big-name newspaper, you're not a real journalist, according to them. Since when does free speech depend on whom you work for? And for the record, by the way, even the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal started in somebody's garage. Right? I mean, the LA Times was born in somebody's garage and only had one employee at one point in time. Breitbart, which is now a media conglomerate and does expose stuff. Would they be considered an official news organization now? I don't know, but when Breitbart started it, it was Breitbart in his living room. So what? Under the new regulations that are desired by Schumer and Feinstein, the monsters, you would be able to say Breitbart is not allowed to have free speech? No, they just killed him. Ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you, this system has fallen so far from reality of what we should be willing to accept. I'm going to read you an article, or not read you an article, but I'm going to talk to you about this article that is posted where they are referencing 500 writers who have gotten together and said, look, what's going on here with the state and the spying and all of that, this is criminal. They're calling it surveillance is theft. And we're going to talk about it because in that segment, which is the right after this, I got to tell you, I don't understand how America can sit by idly and allow this to go on. And it's not just one area. It's everywhere. I recognize that you feel helpless. But at the same point in time, just sitting here and saying, well, I'm too busy to take that on. I'm too busy to deal with that. Or I don't want to be I don't want to be on a list somewhere. That's not going to cut it, folks. Freedom belongs to those who are going to be willing to demand it and hold on to it and value it. You have to realize where we are. We are so far down the rabbit hole here. And the press is the ones who should be saying to us, with alarm bells clanging, the klaxons whooping, that Americans need to stand up and fight for their nation or we're going to lose it. And they're not. They are not telling us the truth. And people like me are out there. There's lots of these independent people out there, that alternative media who are trying to spread this out there. But folks, what, you don't believe it's credible unless it's on the front page of the New York Times? That's exactly the point. You're never going to see it on the front page of the New York Times. They're playing you because you won't wait to see it, or you won't believe it unless you see it in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or on Fox News. But there's a lot of stuff that Fox News is never going to put on. Don't tell me for a second that you think that they are independent of government intrusion into their business. If you actually believe that, look at the owner, Murdoch. The guy's a multi-zillionaire. He owns the Wall Street Journal and the Fox News, and a half a dozen others. I mean, yeah, they dribble out a little here and a little there, but they really never get to the truth. They never get to the core. There's no true investigative exposés. Where is that? If Fox was so great at what they do, why didn't Edward Snowden go to them? Why did he go to the Washington Post and the Guardian newspaper? Why did he go to ProPublica? We are in exigent, immediate danger. And most of America is just sitting around saying, well, what the hell, I got enough beer for tonight. I got a job. I ain't worried about all that. I'm just worried about whether or not I can pay the mortgage this month. America, you're losing it. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. You can find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org and .com. You can find our Facebook page at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. And you can find our YouTube channel at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. You can also find us at Spreaker.com. That's like speaker with an R. Spreaker.com/user/America's Voice Now, where you can actually download these episodes. If you have a mobile phone, you can use the Spreaker app on your mobile phone. Just download it from either iTunes or Android, and then search for Michael Evans, America's Voice Now, and then you can listen to these right on your cell phone. And share, folks. Please share these stories and messages. If you think this has impact, then share it with somebody. We'll be back in just a moment.